Now, how many, just hold your fingers up. Well, Rod, you've been to 11 synods, so you don't have enough fingers. But the rest of you, how many synods have you been to? 2 for Ren, 2 for David, and 5 for Rick. And, you know, okay, so.
How many for you, Paul?
I think I've been to 6. Ooh. So I'm getting up there.
Right.
5 or 6. Now, Ren, your 2 synods were in succession. And because you're not a minister, ministers tend to go more often because elders kind of come in and out of service. And of course, the last synod you went to was last year. And so you haven't been to synods you haven't had a non-post-COVID synod. And then we'll get into that for some of us because it's 2022 I went to 2022 and it was familiar, but of course it was intense because it was after COVID, after a few years. I kind of knew which way things were going to go. I suspected, but then it was even more dramatic than I thought. Coming into this synod, Ren, what were some of your thoughts? And were there ways that this synod 2024 was different from 2023?
The feeling was very different.
Oh, okay. How so?
I felt last year I would say okay and so now all of those things you've said about me I won't, and that's the lens that you have to come through. Is I had no idea what was going on last year. I had gone through I prepped a ton because I'm a faculty member. I thought this was a good opportunity to serve the church, and I had a lot of time to prepare, and I used that time. So school ended about May 1st, and I studied. I mean, I read church order several times and the supplements. Not only did I read the whole agenda several times. I was very well prepared, but had no idea what I was doing. There were like questions and not sure where direction would go and not sure what would happen. And this year came in, there was a resoluteness of purpose that I felt that, and I would say again, on the heels of last year, there was stuff left undone, and there would not be those sacrifices this year. And there was a focus it was laser-like focus on getting the things done. At the same time, really giving people time to breathe. That was interesting too. How Derek just did a wonderful, and everybody said that. So I'm just beating that gong again. A wonderful job of that resolve and freedom and breathing. Yeah.
Okay, Rick, so did you go to any of the post-COVID synods, or was this your first post-COVID synod?
This was my first post-COVID.
Okay. And so what did you notice going into this synod?
Well, at least from the agenda, it was a barrage. Just a barrage of overtures and communications from each side. Comparing it to my previous 4, I mean, those were relatively simple by comparison. I mean, this was definitely, more intense just in terms of the significance. And I think that was reflected in the agenda, just the amount, the carryover from the previous agenda and communications and overtures from each side. So, and, I think to improve upon last year's, they began online. They had 2 online kind of introductory sessions to kind of, help with that focus. So, it's overwhelming. It always is. I tell people who from here when they go for the first time is, read your committee stuff first. Know that, and it is going to be a whirlwind. And I think the same holds true this time too. It's a lot of work. It's intense. And I know that in our committee, one of the issues we had was that, all of the issues interrelate. And so the program committee, I think, had had to do a really hard job of divvying up, materials. And then when we were in committee, sometimes we would start to begin talking about this other thing, but then we were told, well, you know what, we don't really need to do that because that's going to be handled by, this other committee and this other committee. And all these things kind of fit together like dominoes. And it was kind of difficult that way. Yeah. We're all talking about the same thing, but different aspects of it. So that was very unusual.
Yeah. I don't know if I've seen a synod where usually the different advisory committees are sort of siloed. And in the 2022 synod, I was on the binationality team, and that was our focus. And we knew that there were these other things, but we were going to handle binationality. This one, I don't think I've ever seen one issue so distributed across advisory teams, which would mean that it gets really difficult working in your advisory team, depending on what other teams are doing. And then the sequence at which they're going to come to the floor, because a decision being made at one point is going to impact your report. So this was, in that sense, probably the most complex synod, just procedurally, that I've seen.
Well, and that's exactly what happened to our committee. So we were kind of the last domino. And basically, we had to rewrite our report because of prior decisions that had been made. We were going to propose certain actions. Well, it would end up being proposing a completely different set of actions, what we had already approved earlier. So we had to go back and rework basically the night before. I mean, it was pretty stressful for our committee because we were at the end of the chain, so to speak.
Okay. So, David, this was your second synod. What was your first?
I think it was 2012 or 13.
Okay. Quite a separation between them.
Yeah. 11 or 12 years, or maybe 13. I don't even know.
Okay. So what did you notice about this synod coming into it?
Well, in 2000, I think it was 13. Like, I didn't know what was going on ever. I could never find the right place to be. So I felt confused the entire time. But it was low stakes. It was a low stakes synod. And so I remember I was going out every night with friends. I was back in Grand Rapids. I'm just having fun. And then I show up on the synod floor and I'm like, I got paper everywhere and I don't know which one to pay attention to. But it felt like it almost didn't matter, like, because there was a lot of unity. There wasn't really anything difficult to deal with. This synod, I looked like I was put on the Gravamen committee.
And then I looked at that word, huh?
Yeah, Gravamen. Yeah.
There was a whole lesson on that.
Yeah. Didn't you pay attention, David?
I know. But I looked at the agenda. I thought, oh my goodness, like there's no going out this synod. Like I've got to buckle it down. And so I read a lot coming into things, and I thought a lot about it. And then our committee experience was quite amazing. It's actually a miracle, I think, that we didn't have majority, minority, but we had just one report. And I was sort of the lone. So I wrote 2 minority reports because at a certain point, like this was just so intense and not in any way mean. Like there was such a good, calm spirit in the room, and I think Andy Seitzma really helped to create that. But at a certain point, like I was going along with the group, at a certain point something was said, and it just like hit me. It was like, is this what I want? And so I just started writing. And on Sunday morning, I was trying to edit this, our preamble to the report, and I can't do this. I am just not on board with this. And so I'm like, well, what are you on board with, David? You gotta start putting this down. And so I didn't go to church. Like I was like, my fingers just started flying on my keyboard. I'm like, okay, this is your act of worship this morning is to get this out. And so I started and I wrote this minority report. I've never done one of those before, so it's like I'm just making things up, trying to get my opinion out. And I just send this out to all the people in my committee. I'm like, I'm sorry, guys, but this is where I'm at. And then I met with the chair, and then they're like, yeah, maybe. They never discouraged it. No one ever discouraged. I really came to appreciate how Synod allows for everyone's voice in sort of I mean, you don't get to say whatever you want to say, and you don't get mic time all the time, but you always actually get to have your voice. And so I met with the chair and the reporter, and they gave me some suggestions for how to basically make a better minority report. So I went back in the afternoon and wrote my second minority report with some of their suggestions in mind, and just totally redid it. And then procedurally, they're like, this has to get before the body, like before the committee. You can't just submit your minority report without everyone else seeing it. So we had this basically an emergency meeting on Sunday night at 10 o'clock. We were up till 11:30, and the committee heard me out, and they're like, yeah, no, we like some of your ideas. Let's incorporate them in. And then I was all of a sudden like, you know what? I think I can sign this. And I still felt mixed about it.
Can
But
I ask?
Yeah.
And I don't know if I can do this without weeping, but you went representing what you were called to, a position you were called to by God. I trust you weren't representing your own ideas. And then you negotiated with the group to get, like, if your idea is represented, and you can't do it in it's not one dimensional. It's the ideas, the positions are very complex. But if you represent a position, then you negotiate with the group to get to this consensus, which is not where you started. And I wrestle with, did I sell out my God in the process? Did I sell it out for political? Did I sell out because I was weak and simple? But I had a position that I thought represented my God. And we landed somewhere else. And was that an act of faith or faithlessness? And it torments me.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, no, I felt, I know exactly what you're talking about, Ren. And even after when I gave my yes to it, almost the next feeling I had was, did I just capitulate for the sake of the group, which is kind of what I do.
Did I sacrifice my God for the
you
group?
know what? Everyone wants to do this. I guess I'll just go with the flow. That is part of my nature to just sort of want to make peace in the situation. And I don't know. I cried way more than I ever thought I would. It was way more emotional on me. And I don't know. It was quite a remarkable experience. I'm really still processing. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's something that people who watch Synod on the internet can't appreciate. And actually, I debriefed with Aaliyah a couple days ago by phone, and that was one of the things. It was her first Synod. She's not been a minister very long, but she said I had no idea how much of Synod is in those advisory committees. And I would argue, in many ways, that's the real Synod. That's in those advisory committees. And as you say, David, that's sort of where everyone has a voice. And before Aaliyah went, she says, well, what do you have to say to me? I said, well, the first thing is your advisory committee is really where you speak. So much of what happens on the floor can tend to be, it's just what happens on the floor of the plenary session. But in the advisory committee is really where you as a delegate wrestle with, in a limited thing, wrestle with the others and wrestle with your conscience and work together towards agreement and in many ways mutual submission, because to what degree mutual submission, to what degree negotiation, but that's really the genius of Synod, is the plenary committees. And they're not They're not on YouTube live stream. So,
and my committee is, I'll just say this briefly, like, because we stuck together, it was a more well-rounded report, and people moved. Like, it wasn't just me kind of making these like hard choices of, like, other people were making hard choices to let go of things that they felt really important about, or they felt they were very important. And so I saw it both ways, and it was actually very powerful to be a part of.
Good, Ren.
You say you're still wrestling, David, with what took place last week. What was your experience in 2013 when you say you were dealing with? My experience last year, because I served on education committee, this year we had some weighty issues, I'll say. Just use those words. And my experience was different last year because the weightiness of the issues and sacrificing candidacy is not, it's important, but it's not what we were. Did you walk away from Synod in 2013 and go, yep, piece of cake, I could go back next year? Or was that, like, this year, you and I are probably similar. We're like, wow, we're not going to sleep for another week. The demons come out as soon as you lay down, and it's hard. What was 2013? Just easy peasy, and it was a vacation that you didn't bring your wife on.
That's right. Yeah. It was fine, but I did go away thinking, I don't need to do this all the time. It's like, I could go once a decade and that would probably be good.
Yeah.
But after honestly, that made me think, oh, I could go more often, but I wouldn't want to go every year. Like, it took more of a emotional toll than I expected.
So Rod, you've almost been to more synods than the rest of us combined. Not quite. What did you notice coming into this one?
I think the political stuff, like the very first synod I went to was in the 80s, 89, I think. And it was a 2-week synod, and I was an elder delegate, and man, did you have time for relationship building and conversations, and it was truly deliberative. It's no longer deliberative. The little bit of deliberation that happens in the committee. There's no deliberation on the floor that you're just arguing and making your point. I think all the various outside influences were going, you can name them all. They're all, when we shortened it to 1 week, we created this thing where you have a limited time to get your voice in, you better get your voice in, and so you resort to politics to do that. And so you try to influence ahead of time and all that kind of stuff. So I really felt that. Man, Ren and David, I so agree with you. I was on the discipline committee, Committee 8, and that was brutal. Like, I want to show you, if I can. Does it come through?
Yeah, yeah, right there. I see it. Yeah, your cross.
That's a cross I've worn around my neck for 25 years. It's a beautiful cross. I love it, and my wife gave it to me. I have a theology of jewelry you can talk to me about sometime, but this cross was really meaningful to me. While we were sitting in our committee and the arguments were raging back and forth, literally the cross just broke and part of it fell on the ground. And I just wept. Not for the loss of the cross, but for the loss of what I see. I predicted 20 years ago the denomination was going to die. Dying is ugly, and it's a slow process, and it's painful to watch. And we're ripping each other apart, and we're trying to see who's pure and not pure and more pure, and who's got it together and who doesn't have it together, and who's more loving and who's kinder, and all those things. And we're fighting over less and less and less. And so the fights become more and more bitter and more angry and more virulent. And so you have to, so I'm sitting in the committee, and I, like you, David, I would have had to write we had a minority and a majority. I would have had to write another minority, and I actually started thinking about that because there were certain things I'm totally in agreement with, and then there's some other things in our committee I just think there was like, no, that's just wrong, and so I compromised, and like you all did. May I say, I think God delights in that, actually. I've had to do that in ministry for all these years. So my co-pastor, Eric Siepin, he is now a commissioned pastor in the CRC. When we first met, he did not believe in the baptism of the children of believing parents. Infant baptism was not a thing. But I love that man. And so we were in relationship together in ministry. And it's like, I can't just divide this, right? So we compromised, and we did infant baptisms, and we did he would do the baby dedications, and I do. Then he asked me to do a dedication of his daughter. And I said, this goes against everything I hold dear. Like this, you're asking me to do the impossible. But I did it because I love him, and I love the intimacy of the relationship. It tore me up to do it. And he recognized it and wept, thanked me profusely, and said, when your grandbabies come, because I'm too old to have babies, when your grandbabies come along, he says, I would love to be the one who baptized them as infants. And I think that, and then later on, he started to see the wisdom and beauty of covenant baptism and made an incredible defense of it when he became ordained as a commissioned pastor. So, but that took time. It took a dozen years or more, it doesn't happen by Thursday. And I think once we set up these boundaries, it all has to happen by Thursday. The other thing we disagreed on was women in church office. And I was a huge proponent, and he was absolutely opposed. Although he says he never was. It's not true. But you can't both have women in office and not have women in office. So we could compromise in this other area, but we couldn't. So I learned this really hard word, which is submission. So I said to Eric, okay, we won't have women as elders and deacons or pastors, but I want you to know you're dead wrong. And I completely disagree with you, but I will not divide the church over this. I just won't. I'm for it publicly, and not because I'm for it, but because for the sake of oneness and unity. So now, by the way, his wife is one of our pastors and who took my place, just so you know. But all again, that takes incredible amount of time. And I think with the compromising it's huge. It's the essence of what we are called to do. And that means a guy who can trace his baptismal records through the generations back to when Napoleon invaded the Netherlands and forced those dumb Dutch people to take last names. Christian names. I'm in that long line. And so, and it's not submission if you don't give up something you dearly, truly, deeply believe, right? Then it's just negotiation or all these other things. But to take something that's so precious to you and allow it to not stand, that's the hardest thing. People asked me when I retired a year and a half ago at the banquet they threw me, they said, what do you wish you had preached about more? And I said submission, because it's the hardest thing Christians do.